What we should see is a flicker in this test light if there is coil negative control. Crank it. Okay, this is coil negative on the opposite coil. This is the blue control wire. Again, we want to see a flicker. Crank it. Good. Okay, no flicker, no control on either coil, and that means that this car does not need a coil. What we need to address is why there's no negative control. Go ahead and crank it. Good. Notice the flicker in the test light indicating control of this coil. That's what we were looking for in the first place. Okay, on the blue control wire, key is on, normal for the light to be lit. Go ahead and crank it. Okay, good. Got control on the blue wire as noted by the pulsing of the test light. So if you have a coil that has no spark and you have good control as indicated by the test light, what that tells you is you have a bad coil. If you have a coil that has no spark and you have no control at the coil using the test light, that tells you to move away from the coil as a cause and move toward what's controlling the coil. In this case, we had an igniter problem. And again, one more time, there is a variable to this test. It's not 100%. I wish there was an answer here that I could say, look, the test light is accurate in all circumstances, and it's not. Coil negative doesn't pulse, means there's no control. And I said to you guys, what? No control, don't put a coil in it, right? No control, don't put a coil in it. One more picture just to emphasize this. This is a graphing multimeter doing the same thing. Showed you with the test light. This car has no spark. What is this? This is on coil negative. What is all that crap in there? We would call this control. What is the pulsing? The pulsing is, it's this thing right here. You're looking at this event. See the blue trace here? Look at the blue trace. You're looking at that event occurring over and over on a 5-second screen. What is my time base here? Don't have it listed. Milliseconds. It's going to be, this is a 10 millisecond screen. What is this? This is a 5-second screen. Do you understand how close together they would be on a 5-second screen? You can't see detail there, but what does that activity tell you? This would be your test light flickering if you put a test light on it. It's control, right? No spark, I have control. What is this? Bad coil, right? Over here, no spark, no control. What are we saying? It is not a coil problem. This is what we've done so far. There's just another picture of it. Test light would not flicker over here to the right. Test light would flicker over here to the left. Is there a variable here? Yes. Is there a variable here? Yes. We covered this one already. Page 20. This one to the right, we're about to cover it. So I got this Chrysler. Starting right here. It's a coil over plug engine. This one's fun. I like this one. V6 engine, single cylinder misfire, coil over plug. The design here would be that the coils share a feed and internal, so here's coil, internal to the PCM is the driver. Remember, it's a Chrysler, and Chryslers didn't use external ignition modules, so the coils were directly controlled by the engine computer. They were 2-wire coils. Coil over plug, there's 6 of them. So now we have 6 primary circuits, 6 secondary circuits, 6 different drivers in the computer, okay? And we'll just compare 2 of them. So just so you have perspective, the secondary would be here, right? And then we'd have spark coming out of that guy here. And here's the secondary here, and we would have spark coming out of that guy there. And let's say this is cylinder number 4 and this is cylinder number 5. And there would be 1 for every single cylinder on the car. Guys, the cool thing about this, these coil over plug designs, is they're no different than the distributor coils that we've used for 40 years. You know, a distributor coil has a primary and a secondary, and we're doing the same thing. We just have one on every cylinder now. And, people were afraid of them when they first came out, but when you study them, the testing of them is no different than testing any other coil. The only difference would be that 3-wire one I mentioned where the driver's inside. We'll come back to that. These are 2-wire ones. So we're comparing, say, 2 different cylinders, and I think it was the number 5 with a 1-cylinder misfire. I'm not telling what cylinder, it doesn't matter. My memory says it was a number 5, okay? So I'm looking at these 2, and the first thing I'm doing, these are voltage waveforms. So if I want a voltage waveform, which side of the coil do I need to be on? The positive, the feed, or the negative, which is the control, for a voltage waveform? Control, negative. So I have my scope connected to this wire and this wire. And I'm showing 2 different voltage waveforms. When viewing primary voltage, you would want your voltage scales to be very high. Notice this is a 400 volt, 0 to 400 volt screen. It's really 500 volt, isn't it? Got some negative numbers I'm not using. But I chose that because I know the primary circuit, when it collapses, will exceed 300 volts on average. Little scope stuff going into it. We know how to set our scope up. What do we see? I'm on a long time base, so this event is very condensed. I'm just looking for control. Does that make sense? Does this coil over here to the left have control? Yes, it does. This coil over here to the right, I see 0 volts here, there's 50. That looks like that's pretty much battery voltage right there, doesn't it? Coil negative is pretty much 14 volts on this other coil. That would be this top one. Let's call it 14 volts. Flat line here, right? What would we say about this? I would say, and I think you would agree, that there is no control. Does that make sense? All right, if there's no control, would you put a coil in this engine? Very good. No, you guys are all shaking your head. No, we wouldn't put a coil in this. There's no control. And if there's no control, why are you replacing the coil? That's not going to fix the control issue, right? And I would agree with you. Would the test light flicker on this cylinder? You're saying yes. Why would you say that? What makes the test light flicker? What makes the test light flicker is when this coil gets grounded, the test light will momentarily go out because we're connected to ground. Test light goes out, and then when it comes back up the spike or back to battery voltage, the test light lights again. And then when the test light or the circuit's grounded, the test light will go out because our test light's connected to ground. Ground to ground, light's not lit. Ground to power, it is lit. It's really not a power, it's a control circuit waiting for a ground, but that's what makes the light light. So the picture over here, would your test light flicker if you were connected to this circuit and ground? No. Would your test light flicker if you were connected to this circuit and ground? Yes. So further confirming, no control says don't put a coil in it. Just 2 different ways to attack it. Next page. Same picture, although what I've done now is I have installed an amp probe. So let's back up so I don't have to redraw this. I put an amp probe now on this circuit, amperage, and this circuit, amperage. I would need 2 amp probes though, wouldn't I? I actually didn't do it there. I put the amp probe over here. Why would I do that? I put the amp probe over here on the feed side. I can read both coil amperages staggered individually, so just a little more scope stuff there. I put an amp probe on both, okay? Here's the thing. The red trace is my amperage. And you can see the red trace matching the blue trace here. Every time we have a blue trace activity, we have a red trace activity. That would make sense. When we turn the circuit on, it gets grounded, current flow begins. When we turn the circuit off, here, yeah, it stops. Up here, amperage, down here. Voltage, that doesn't make sense. How can you have on this picture current flow through, let's say the number 5 is our issue, right? We have current flow through this, and we do because of my amp probe, right? I'm showing amperage. but no ground, no control with the voltage. How is that possible? Well, I think it's time to take this and zoom in on one of those and zoom in on one of these and show you the difference. Next page. There's activity. We can see it. You guys that were part of my injector shorted injector conversation, you already know what's wrong. What is it?
That's like there's no wire.
Very good, guys. No counter electromotive force. That primary winding is shorted out. Okay? So, what is that? I think we need to go in one more time. One more time. There is control on the voltmeter. There is control. What are we looking at? What we're looking at is a driver that is protecting itself from too much current flow. This primary winding is so shorted out and the amperage increases so fast that what that driver does is it grounded the circuit, okay? And the amperage peaked at the same time it grounded the circuit, so it immediately started to current limit to protect the computer. It's protecting itself. So this is what I would call an intentional bad ground. It's ground side switched. And what we're doing, I put the numbers for you. Here's a cursor here and a cursor here. So we got 13.9 and 12.5. We have a 1.3 volt difference. Basically, we're taking battery voltage and we're dropping it by 1.3 volts, which is enough current flow to make this thing draw. And again, there's my scales. This is 4 amp, this is 8 amp, there's 12 amp. Looks like about, I don't know, 9 or 10 amps. 9 or 10 amps of current flow with only a 1.3 volt drop. That is a major shorted coil. We know that just by looking at the waveform though, right? No straight up lines in any coil of wire. Okay, now, do you understand that what I told you with the test light is coil negative, if it doesn't pulse, there's no control. And I said, why would you put a coil in it? What's this car need? A coil. Wow, it's contradictory now. So, I know. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I'm not making this stuff up, I promise. I wish I could make it all nice and pretty and get rid of all the gray areas. If I could do that, then anybody could do this. If you want to make money, and this is cool and fun right now, maybe later it won't be, but right now this is kind of fun. You'll enjoy this later, I promise. And you'll have all this up in your head and you're going to make a freaking killing because nobody knows this stuff. And it's not that hard. It's not. Okay, lesson here is what? Is the test light foolproof? No. And if you look back on page 8, you'll see the note. What do I have? Coil negative doesn't pulse. I have the note in here for you. Coil negative doesn't pulse. Let me get rid of this ink. Coil negative doesn't pulse means there's no control, right? I have an or. It's right here. Or what? In this Subaru video, I addressed this problem by putting an amp probe on my circuit and cranking it over and making sure I didn't have any amperage. That's the key. But guess what? We're back to a scope again. I'm trying to give you tests that don't involve a scope. And I keep coming back to you need a scope. The guys in your shop may think you don't need one. You bring up this case study, you tell me how you would attack this otherwise. So they might say, well, ohm the coil. Okay, ohm the coil. It ohms just like the other ones. How is that? How can you have a shorted coil give you the exact same resistance that a good coil is? The reason why, it's not under stress. The stress of the amperage and current through that coil heats it up. The windings short together. You take the stress away and the windings unshort. You don't believe me? I'm about to show you one. I got a picture of one. It's like one of the last pictures here. I get tired of people saying, do a resistance check on the coil. Why don't you do a resistance check on the coil? This is one time. Don't bother. Don't bother. Look, Spec. This is a cylinder, has no spark. You can see the spark line's missing. There's a good spark line. Top picture has a shorted secondary winding. We're going to talk about this after the next segment. It won't be today probably, but we're going to focus on this area in here to tell us whether or not we have a shorted secondary. Not shorted primary, but shorted secondary. Top coil has a shorted secondary winding. I did a resistance check on it. 7,600 ohms. Spec, 6,000 to 8,000. Is that in spec? Yes. All right, very good. Bottom one, 6,900 ohms. Spec, 6,000 to 8,000. Resistance is good. That coil's not bad. Yes, it is. Wrong tool, need a scope, and an amp probe. Okay? I see it over and over again. Good resistance readings on coils that are bad. We need to stress them. We need to be able to look at them when they're under stress. And the reason we need a scope is this thing's only turned on for, what's this picture? This is 0. That's 25 milliseconds. I think the entire event occurs every 25 milliseconds during this cranking situation. It would be less with it running. You're not going to catch that on a voltmeter that updates every 500 milliseconds if you're lucky, right? You'd have how many events taking place? 4, and then, you'd have 20 events taking place before the voltmeter would even take another sample. It happened 20 more times, the whole entire event. Are you going to see that with a voltmeter? No. Do you need a scope? Yes. All right, everybody clear on this one? There's one piece that I failed to share with you, because it really wasn't necessary to prove my point. In the field, it was very important. In the field, I approached this differently. I've got to redraw this real quick. Here's my coil. Here's another coil. When I started in the field, guys, I had 12 volts here. Okay, I had control on this one. No control up top. Put an amp probe on it. Here, had no amperage. Next step, came to the computer, had 12 here. No amperage. Single cylinder miss. This driver was bad. This is the approach. Now from here is the rest of it. My concern, I know I have a bad driver. That driver most likely is bad because this coil cooked it. So how did I get the rest of these pictures? I kind of lied to you a little bit. I took this control wire and this control wire and I switched them. I took this circuit and I put this one. Here's my suspect coil, right? I'm worried about this coil because I know this driver's bad. I took this and I ran it on here. And I did the rest of my checks, my amperage and my voltage on this circuit with the good driver on it. Now, you might be thinking, why would you do that? You're going to cook that other driver. You're right, but I don't care. I already need a computer, don't I? I've already did my diagnosis. I need a computer. And I want to stress this coil, not ohm it. Ohming the coil isn't going to help me. I want to stress it. Now, could I, as a safety measure, change the computer and that coil? You better, if you don't have a way to do this. You have an output with one driver that has failed. You better change that output when you change that computer. Okay? As a safety measure. But this is what I did. So the argument is, well, aren't you going to hurt the computer? Yeah, so it's already hurt. So I have a 2-cylinder misfire when I'm done. Don't care. I need to make sure. When I did this, did that confirm this coil was shorted? The rest of these pictures? Yes. No question about it. Does that confirm that even though the computer can current limit, that it can't do it forever? Can only do it for so long before it cooks this driver. This is another lesson on why we don't drive cars with misfires. You better pull over and check that thing out. Otherwise, you're going to cost yourself a lot of money as opposed to a $50 coil. Now you need a $500 computer too. What else does that tell me? Or what else is the argument here that I hear from people? Well, you're going to cause a misfire and it's going to pop and bang. And no, it's not. This coil is shorted It's not doing anything, so we're not firing it. And when I took this good coil away, that one's not firing either. I just have a 2-cylinder misfire right now. It's not a problem. And if that coil happened to be good, I would be firing it at the wrong time. And if I heard a pop and bang, I would just stop and shut it off. 1 or 2 is not going to kill it. It's firing at the wrong time. So what? Get a pop through the intake because the intake valve's still open. Get a pop through the exhaust because it's at the wrong time. So what? I need this to stress the circuit, to see the pattern, to be sure. Does that make sense? This car needed a computer and a coil. But I use this, though, to stress the shorted coil control issue, and all of that still applies. So I didn't intentionally mislead you or change anything that we just learned. Questions? You probably don't even know what to ask me. Is it clear, the stuff that I've been talking about? Kind of.
It's coming together. It's come together dramatically.
Cool.
It's dramatic.
Cool. Because you're seeing similarities, aren't you?
Yeah.
You're seeing it in section 3. You're seeing it in the injector section. You're seeing it again with the ignition. You're seeing it with the fuel pump circuits that we did. Michael.
I was going to ask, what if you have like a cracked coil pack or like a coil?
A cracked coil pack or coil, we wouldn't be on the control issue. We'd be on the secondary side. And we haven't really covered that yet. So we have some other things we need to do. I think I can do it in an hour, but I'm not going to do it today. I'll do it tomorrow. We have one more day. You guys, I told you, you're taking a test and helping me inventory, but we need to do one more segment. Can you handle it? It's the last time you get to hear me speak.
Right.
One more segment. What we'll cover is the secondary issues. Can we identify secondary problems? How do we handle that? And that would be these other ones, Michael. We'll deal with the coil over plug test. We'll deal with this picture that has an open plug wire. We'll deal with synchronizing them. We'll deal with shorted secondary windings and these oscillations. That'll be the next stuff. And guys, to answer Michael's question of what if you have a cracked winding, you cannot see all problems in a primary current pattern, which is what you're looking at on the screen here. You can't see all problems on the primary side. Sometimes you need to look at the secondary side. And sometimes you need to pull the coil out and put your test light on it and see how far the spark jumps. I'm okay with that. Laying it across the valve cover and see if it's jumping out of the boot. There's nothing wrong with those tests. We don't always have to be high tech. When that coil lives under the intake, we need to be a little bit more high tech. But we'll cover those other variables tomorrow. That's good enough for now.